Welcome to the Infernal Brotherhood's Willow series. Today I'm going to provide my review of the Willow Sourcebook. You see it right there. I've got it right here. And we're going to sort of talk about this. For the past months, for the past X number of months, I've been providing a bunch of Willow content from this sourcebook written by Allen Varney. So I wanted to, now that I've finished with all of this, I've provided you all the information that I possibly could. What I didn't do was just literally copy and paste out of it. I tried to create tight up to 5-minute episodes, on a specific topic, so that one, I would have to read, sort of interpret, rewrite, record, produce, and release the videos so that it wasn't a straight up copy. But I also wanted to sort of filter it through a fan's lens, This was actually written and released at the same time as the movie. So I just figure, this way I can sort of contextualize it a little bit after so many years. And that's what we're going to do. So today is really at the culmination. So this is Dungeons and Dragons. Marinen, thank you for joining live. To answer your question, yes and no. So the Willow Sourcebook is actually about the world of Willow, right? It talks about different characters, places, magic, etc. And it all includes notes if you want to incorporate it in your fantasy game. Now, because they didn't have rights to use or license to use Dungeons and Dragons as a reference, the first portion of this sourcebook is talking about how you can implement it in different role-playing games. So at the time, there must have been a small handful of different versions of Dungeons and Dragons styled games. But these stats and stuff would work perfect with the Dungeons and Dragons game or the advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. But this, again, was back in the 80s, so it does not include second edition Dungeons and Dragons or, on forward until today. However, it would be easy to sort of reskin the creatures if you did ever want to run a campaign. But more to the point than this just being a role-playing game supplement, I really just think it's a world-building supplement. So if you did really appreciate the film, if you ever read the novel or the comics that are really just versions of the film, this adds an incredible amount of backstory that the film and the novel didn't even include. And the novel did have a number of additions that the film had to cut out for time. Those I actually included in another video in this same Willow playlist. You can find the link in the description below. But this answers questions like, what's life in the Nelwyn village like? How did Madmartigan get trapped in a cage anyhow? How did Bavmorda rise to power? What's the background to Eric's relationship with Madmartigan? Who is Kale, and how did he get to be Bavmorda's general? So all of those questions are answered in this source book. But what I wasn't able to do because of the format I chose to present this information in is show you the incredible illustrations or the map that's in this. Now, this was released by Tor Books in 1988. Tor Books also did the Willow board game, or one of the Willow board games, that I have actually done a playthrough on this channel. Again, it's in the Willow playlist. So you can check that out. With my co-host Cameron and our wives, and we had a great time. We played it a couple times, and I would actually play that board game. I would force my friends to play that board game. It was so good, but they would all love it, and I ended up giving it to a friend before I joined the military. So I had to rebuy it in order to find it. It is out there in the secondary market. It is kind of expensive at this point, though. So if you are looking forward to it, picking up a copy, I highly recommend you do. It's going to cost you just a little bit. So anyway, this is also available on the secondary market. It is also expensive, and that's because it only had one print run. And because the film did not do as well as expected, they didn't do any secondary print runs or extrapolate on the world until after the trilogy, the Chronicles of the Shadow War, were released as a sequel to the movie and film Willow. This doesn't contain any of that information, though. This is just the film and backwards, going, explaining how characters got to where they are and stuff. But I do want to sort of walk through the credits of this. I want to talk about what I think is, the best parts of this source book, what I would use it for, and just sort of riff a little bit. These Willow episodes are meant to be short, digestible things. This is going to go a little bit longer, but, if you bear with me, we can have a little bit of fun talking about a really wonderful film, which I don't know why has such a bad rap with so many people, because I really do think it's a great film. All right, that being said, so this is authorized by Lucasfilms Fantasy Film. So George Lucas did presumably approve all of the content in here. It was additional material was included by Greg Kostikian, and Greg also, he's part of the Tor, as I understand it, is part of the Tor Books sort of powers that be that ran that company, and he helped create the board game as well. So this was edited by Debbie Notkin and Greg Kostikian. I hope I'm saying that right. Illustrations throughout this were by Janet J. Kramer, and I suspect she was the same person who illustrated all of the artwork in the board game as well, because it does look very, very similar, if not exact. The map illustration, so let me just give you an example of the illustrations in here, just so you can see what I'm talking about. And it's unfortunate because you guys could not see this stuff when I was doing the reviews here, or presenting that information. But like, this is a scene where Mad Mardigan is attacked by a Cyclops, and he was with the army of Galador doing their first fight against the Nockmaar army, and he ended up getting attacked by the Cyclops. And when he got back, the army was decimated. He tried to explain what happened. No one believed him. And that's one of the reasons why he ended up being, sort of disgraced. But of course, like here, we've got Bavmorda, the evil queen, Bavmorda. I'm sure I'm going to be throwing out quotes from the film because I love it so much. I want to show a couple more of these just because they're fun. I'm trying to find some good ones. Here's a good one with, I think that's Eric. So you can see that this was, it's just a old school line art illustration style, but it is beautiful the way they put it together. This is the last video I did about who is Ethna. This is the scene where the three hunters are actually helping her escape the Nockmaar soldiers downriver as the Pohas are attacking them on their raft. And it's just, just the fact of the Pohas themselves, we were never really introduced to them in the film, even though they were referenced in the script. And it's just, and Vonkar, God, he did such a, all right, well, here's another really great shot. I'm doing like partial talking here. And then it has a little bit where, a little insert where it shows you some photos from the film and stuff like that, which is great. But it's really just illustrations and content, and just an incredible amount of content. Okay, so the map that I just referenced, this is the Willow world map. And what's interesting to note about this, let me try to pull it back. What's interesting to note about that map, oh, that's great. I loved Willow too. I watched it so much. Is that this map follows the board game layout. So it makes sense that Tor did both of them, so, sort of just recreate the wheel here, as it were. But it just mentions a lot of different call-out places and details from the film and this source book itself as well. So let's see, what else? The book design was by Jay Zimnet and Neuwirth and Associated. The cover design was by Carol Russo, and there was an internal thanks to Anita Gross and Ken Rolston. So my favorite parts of this book. I love the backstory on Vonkar. The fact that Vonkar traveled outside of the Nelwyn village. He lived a life with sailors. He traveled up north to the frozen wastes. He was a sort of a hero, and he was like rescued by elves, if memory is serving me correctly. And he actually has a a ring or a bracelet or a necklace, and I can't remember which one it is. He has a piece of jewelry that was gifted to him by the elves that also has the symbol of Elora Danan that she had on her leg, marking her as the chosen one to defeat the evil Queen Bavmorda. So I thought that was always really interesting, is that Vonkar is somehow connected with this spirit of rebellion that would ultimately lead to the downfall or the overthrow of Bavmorda. And you could sort of, in your own headcanon, extrapolate that into, well, Vonkar did defend all of the children and the village when the Death Dogs came at the very beginning of the film. And so that's, that sort of helps pay off that idea. He helped protect her on the way to the crossroads, which is another way you could sort of see it. Another part that I really loved about this was Madmartigan's background. When we first see Madmartigan in that crow's cage and we see Eric coming with the remnants of the Galadorn army to the crossroads, and he was just, they knew each other. He thought you were a woman, Eric. He's like, oh, Madmartigan, I always knew you'd end up in a crow's cage. What'd you do this time? Nothing you wouldn't have done in my situation. Like, they knew each other. They were brothers. They were raised as knights together, like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, basically. The difference is that once Madmartigan was, sort of battered around by that Cyclops, and he finally got away and the army was decimated and he came back, he was disgraced. And so, he was always a bit of a womanizer because that's Madmartigan. What are you going to do? None of the women were complaining. Maybe Glug was the only, or Lug was the only one that was complaining. Not a woman, not a woman, right? But I love the backstory. We get this wonderful connective tissue between the characters. We get to understand the lore of this sort of wonderful fantasy world a little bit better. It explains why Sholindria did not stop Bavmorda when Bavmorda was coming to power. It explains how Bavmorda got the power. It actually calls out specific evil volumes of magic that Bavmorda was referencing. In order to gain all of this power so quickly, faster than Fin Raziel, for example. It talked about that first battle with Fin Raziel versus Bavmorda, why it took so long to happen, how the king of Tir Asleen really had a love interest in Fin Raziel, but it was because of Bavmorda's sorcery that he was charmed to marry her. And then the real king and queen suddenly mysteriously died, and Fin Raziel suspected it was always Bavmorda in the first place. And so no one wanted to contest because she was the de facto queen. And she was really, really powerful. All the other magicians in the land didn't want to mess with her because she messed with stuff that was ooky and scary, right? I wouldn't be surprised if she had a human-bound spellbook somewhere, like a Necronomicon. That's just the type of wonderful, evil being that Bavmorda was. So much so that she even plays a pivotal role in the end of the Chronicles of the Shadow War trilogy, the sequel to Willow. So it's just so wonderful that there's this really powerful, evil character that is portrayed so beautifully on screen. And then to see her presence still feared after her supposed death or, transportation to some other plane of existence. Very, very cool. She just has this wonderful weight, like this evil weight about her character that just lasts forever. Those two. It's really Madmartigan's backstory. In three. So Bavmorda, Madmartigan, and Vonkar's backstory that are my favorite aspects of this. But if you love Willow, then just exploring a little bit more detail about Willow himself, how he met his wife, the fact that his kids are also magical, like they have the talent that he has, and they sort of explain that a little bit in here as well. It's really, really wonderful. My least favorite parts about this, they don't really, when it comes to like the magical side of Willow, it really only explores what we saw on screen. Understandably, because Allen Varney and the other contributors to this had nothing else to go on, so they just referenced, okay, well, these are the magical spells that were used in the show, and so let's just talk about those. I like the idea of understanding a sort of a prehistory to a given story. That's really why I love, fantasy worlds like Dragonlance, for example, or Star Wars, where it has this really rich backstory that explains how the world came to be. This source book, it hints at stuff like that. It talks about tales of older cultures, some of them older even than the elves, which I find really interesting, and how they influenced later generations or left remnants of themselves behind in the form of like standing stones, for example. So there's a lot of really great world building information, not as detailed as I would like, which is why I think it's probably my least favorite aspect of it, even though I desperately love it. It's just that I wish it would have gone a little bit more into depth and built out this true sense of history. So much so that I wish they would just name the land that they're in. I mean, we get regional name references like Kashmir, Nockmar, Galadorn, Tiris Leen, the Nelwyn Valley. We get stuff like that, but there is a larger world that all of those locations are set in, and it is infinitely larger. And I just don't know what the land is called, what the continent or what the planet is called, and those details like that really leave me with this hollow feeling of it's not quite done. It's just not quite fleshed out enough. So it took you a while to realize that it's not Anduin. I don't know what that reference is. Let me know where you got that name from. So role-playing connections. Boy, do I wish I had this source book when I was a kid, because I used to draw pictures of, well, specifically Mad Mardigan a lot, because I loved his character. But it would be like 1989, 1988 or something like that, when me and my friends would just play out the scenes from the film, and we would just each take a 6-sided dice for combat, and whoever rolled higher ended up, like hitting the other person. And so it was very basic, sort of stripped down version of sort of just reliving the film, but also reimagining it through game mechanics in our own way. It was very customized and stuff. And, we'd run around the yard and, swing wooden sticks and stuff. Swing sticks at each other and stuff. It was really, really great. Anduin is supposed to be the name of Willow's world, but it's not. Oh, I'm going to have to look that up. Because I did read the Chronicles of the Shadow War, and I don't recall if they mentioned like a planet name. They continue with the regional reference names in it. But it does go into metaphysical stuff, and I'll do reviews on those books as well eventually. So, yeah, I guess I love that there is a role-playing connection. I don't think I would ever play a role-playing game in this world at this point, but I certainly would have, and I sort of did my own version of it as a kid. So, if you really are a big-time role player, like tabletop stuff, and you love Willow, the information is here, though I don't think you necessarily need it spelled out in order to apply it to whatever gaming system that you're using, So, whether it's Pathfinder or D&D or whatever, you can just use the familiar tropes and attach them to the types of different characters, both PCs and NPCs throughout this world. They reference Bavmorda as being like 37th level sorceress or something like that, which sounds insane and godly, but I guess that kind of makes sense as how she's portrayed in the films. So, all right, That being said, I really, really dug this source book. I didn't know what I was going to get when I saw it and I ordered it, or I bid for it basically. But I'm so wonderfully pleased about what I did actually get out of this. I think this is a fantastic read. I think Allen Varney did a spectacular job in expanding on the already rich Willow world that we got in the film and novel, and just pushed back a little bit. It gave us tons of backstory and filled out the world for us in a way that we never got with the film or the novelization of the film. So I highly recommend the Willow Sourcebook if you can find it. It's worth the cost if you love Willow stuff. Again, this was like I don't want to say the number, but it was expensive. It was more than I would like to admit having paid for it. But like, you know, I scanned it and made a PDF out of it and made sure I don't actually have to touch it except for, you know, to present it to you guys to show you what kind of visual design is inside of the book itself. But I want to talk a little bit about the future of this Willow series, right? This playlist that we're creating on this channel. This channel is primarily a Star Wars channel, but we are going to be creating more Willow content through a playlist, and we're going to be doing Indiana Jones content as well, because what we really want to do is celebrate George Lucas's IPs, whether it's Indiana Jones or Willow or Star Wars. We probably won't extrapolate out from there, but it'll just be those three. So we'll have dedicated playlists for any Indiana Jones or any Willow content that we put out there. So when the series comes out, we will be doing weekly series reviews. So whenever an episode comes out, we're going to watch it. We're going to give you our review of it. Up until that point and after the season is over, I'm going to be, continuing. I'll do readings from the comics. I'll present literal comic readings. I'll give you reviews of the comics, reviews of the novelization. I've already given you an episode about what is in the novelization that was not in the film, so that's worth checking out if you haven't already. Hey, Stephanie, how you doing? Yeah, Indiana Jones is badass. I desperately love that series. And then, I don't know that I'll ever get to the game side of it, but if I do, I'll give you reviews of those as well. Again, there's just a bunch of there's like 4 different Willow games out there. So, there's a platformer, there's a top role RPG version, there's MS-DOS version that has a bunch of different style games in it. So there's just a lot of different types of games that you can play with Willow. Well, maybe there's only 3. I thought there was 4. Anyway, not important. So if you have a chance, I highly recommend it. It's great. I look forward to sharing more Willow content with you. And of course, right now we're in the middle of the Obi-Wan series reviews. Obi-Wan just had a new series drop today, so look for that. This coming Sunday evening is when we traditionally do our series reviews. Last week was a little bit different. So thank you guys so much for joining me on this review of the Willow Sourcebook. We would like to invite you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, like the video, and if you like the content, share it out. This all goes to help other people learn about this channel and its content, and we genuinely appreciate it. Until the Infernal Brotherhood convenes again, my fellow scruffy-looking Nerf herders, may the Force be with you.